Jerome Alexander with Magellan College Counseling. I'm based in Los Angeles, and we have a team of 12 fabulous counselors, kind of all over the country, working with students all over the country, which is so much easier now that everyone knows how to use Zoom. You know, helping them get through their college search and application process while maintaining their sanity. This Thursday at 5:30, this is our 6th in our series of live streamed interviews with college admissions experts. I'm super, super thrilled to be here with Dr. Karyn Koven, who is the founder of Language Bird, and she will tell you about that in a moment. And let me just do a quick little plug for next week and the following week. Next week, I will be sitting here with one of my clients' parents, Charlie and Rebecca Hutchinson, who have 2 girls, one of whom is a rising junior. Karyn will be happy to know, at the University of Wisconsin. The younger is actually today graduating from a local high school in Los Angeles, and I will let them tell you next week where she's headed to. So that's next Thursday, again at 5:30. And then the following week on the 18th, I'm super, super thrilled to be welcoming Melissa Falk, who is the Dean of Admission at Muhlenberg College, which is a small liberal arts college in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She will specifically talk to us about what is changing because of what we've all experienced over the last 2.5 to 3 months with COVID, and lots of things changing in college admissions, literally minute by minute. We've had some big news even drop today. I do want to take a moment and say, and Karyn and I spoke about this a couple days ago, for a while, last weekend and Monday, I said to myself, I sort of feel strange doing this interview and doing this broadcast because of what's happened in our world over the last week. And I struggle, I will tell you that I struggle with making it appear like I think everything is, you know, normal and we're just going to go back to doing our job and college. I think the world is changing in a big way. I think young people are at the forefront of how the world will change. And I actually think it's wonderful that Karyn and I are going to be talking about extracurricular activities today. Because I think young people have so much to say about where the future of our country is going. And so I think this will be a phenomenal and radically different year in college admissions. But I just wanted to acknowledge that you know, the world is a different and changing place. I just wanted to recognize that. So now that I've said all of that yammery stuff, here we are, and welcome again. And let me introduce you again to my friend and colleague, Dr. Karyn Koven. I actually first met Karyn, I'm gonna say over 10 years ago, when she was a co-founder and the college advisor at a small charter high school in the San Fernando Valley. And I used to, I think most people who know me know this, I used to be a volunteer for Johns Hopkins University, and I interviewed students who were interested in applying, but I also did what admissions people do, which is I visited high schools the way admissions staff visited high schools. I didn't do it, I was 100% volunteer. I basically did it because the representative from Hopkins would call me and say, hey, I'm gonna be in Los Angeles for 2 weeks. You know, here are the schools I'm visiting. And I would say, what about this one? What about this one? And she would say, I don't have time. And I would say, oh my God, that's horrible. Send me a box of stuff and I'll go visit. So I visited high schools the same way admissions staff do today. And I met Karyn that way, and she sent some fabulous students to apply, and actually at least a few of them attended Hopkins, and that was super exciting. And when I decided that I wanted to train to be a college counselor, Karyn was literally the first person I called. I said, let me interview you, tell me everything you know, and you're going to be my mentor, whether you like it or not. And she has continued to play that fabulous role in my life, and I thank you for that. And today, so how many years has Language Bird been around?
Oh gosh. Well, first I'll say I remember that first conversation that we had where you said, I think that I really want to do this because you've had a variety of amazing professional background, experiences. And I think that you seeing that the colleges don't necessarily get out to all the kids, and the need for that kids get to know about different places and different colleges, that was really intuitive to you, even before you really thought of this as another frontier, right, for yourself. And I think you naturally just gravitated towards it, and really towards working with students in a very personable way. And I remember the first student that you took by hand, Natalie, and she ended up going to Hopkins. And was there, and a tremendous success for her there, and you were able to sort of find her spot, and that was amazing. Yeah. I just wanted to mention that because I do remember that very first conversation many years ago where you said, I think I want to do this. What's this all about?
All about, yeah. So for those of you who are watching, you've joined the Karyn and Evelyn Mutual Admiration Society.
Well, I just thought, I hadn't thought of it because we have known each other for so long, but I do remember that conversation and your work with our students. Yes. So that's always appreciated. And since then, as you mentioned, I was at High Tech High for over 18 years. And then, time flies when you're having fun, and I loved advising students, and I share your passion of finding students a great match, and, making sure that it's a good match for them, and that they're prepared. I just kind of was bitten by a little bug in the process of, advising students. And it really relates to what we're talking about today, extracurricular activities, and also finding your talents and looking at what you're good at and what you want to excel at. And when you are at most schools, actually, larger schools tend to have more options, but when you're at small schools, there aren't very many options sometimes that you have within the school. So you need to look outside of the school for other things to supplement whatever the school is not able to provide or has not chosen to provide. And for me, at my school, one of the things that I saw we just weren't able to do, even if we wanted to, was provide other languages to students. And we started getting them online, and this was like 6 or 7 years ago. And we started saying, well, if you want to take another language, and I'd say, that's great. Like, I'm glad you're interested in this other thing. Let's try to get you an online class during your elective period. Let's give you a French class, because all we offered was Spanish. And I saw immediately that while online classes worked for certain subjects, they did not work well for language, because students weren't interacting with somebody. And so the really short story of that is that then I decided to create a program in which students connect face-to-face, just like we're connecting now, live, synchronously, for personalized one-to-one classes that emphasize learning a language, but learning to speak that language and feel like confident communicators. So we do reading and writing and prepare kids for tests and help and all that kind of stuff. And we're able to provide credit, high school credit, for 13 different world languages now. But the key part is that it's not software. It's about relationships, and teaching kids that learning a language is not about checking a box. It's about being able to communicate with people in the future. And it's about creating relationships and also learning the culture. So So that's what I'm really involved with now, and in doing so also really connected to high school parents and students who are seeking out other things extracurricularly.
Well, and the way you just described Language Bird dovetails really nicely with the way that we like to talk about extracurricular activities, right? It's not about checking the box. It's not about saying you did one visual art, you did one student government, you did one volunteer opportunity, you know, check, check, check. It's really about deeply being involved in a handful, maybe just one or two extracurricular activities. So one of the things that I think many parents who are kind of our age sort of still think about the college application process is that, can you tell my air conditioning just cycled on, is that you need your child to be well-rounded, and that's who gets into the good colleges. That's a whole separate conversation. But Karyn, help people understand why well-rounded isn't exactly what we're going for these days.
Yeah, so you know, I think if anybody gets anything out of this conversation, I thought about it before we got on today, and I was thinking, what's the one thing that I want people to know? And I would say, think very carefully about being authentic.
Yep.
And authenticity. And not just trying to fill a resume or fill your time with a bunch of activities that you think will look good.
Yep.
Because that's a surefire way to just spread yourself too thin. Perhaps another word for that is well-rounded. Spread too thin, I'm not sure. You know, by going into a lot or too many different areas, and it's just not necessary. You know, if you think of yourself as an adult, you know, do you strive to be well-rounded? You know, not really. I mean, some people may say balanced, and they try to exercise and they try to take care of themselves and they try to work and things like that. But I think it's really unrealistic to expect of teenagers the kinds of things that we expect to have a well-rounded person. I mean, they're still really developing, right? They're still, and colleges are aware of this. You know, this is a developmental stage. Like, they're not fully formed, well-rounded people.
Right.
So I think the word in itself is a little bit misleading.
Okay.
Right? And I do think that colleges are looking for students who are interesting and interested.
Yep, love that. I love that.
Do you agree? Interesting and interested.
Yep.
So, you know, it doesn't mean everybody has to have purple hair.
Right.
It doesn't mean everybody has to now learn Mandarin.
Right.
Like, you know, it just really means that whatever it is to you that is interesting to you, that you pursue that. And maybe that means just do one thing in depth.
Right. What though, if you are the parent of a, you know, 15-year-old ninth grader, and they're really not interested in anything? Like, this is honestly one of the biggest fears that we hear is, you know, I get these calls all the time. She's really not into anything. You know, she goes to school, she does her work, she does fine, but, you know, there's not much else she's excited about.
Yeah. I love that. My kid's not interesting, right? It's not that, but I just think that it's a matter of some exposure, right? And we tell students this, we give them the advice when they're going off to college.
Right.
That's another spot, that's like another growth spot, right? If you consider them both like new starting places, starting of college, starting of high school. I'd say a good thing to do, especially if you're starting a new school, is to allow them to try some things. And of the things that they try, it's okay not to do everything. But maybe it's an assortment of clubs that they try at their school, if that's available, or an elective that they try at their school, that if that's available, you know, and sampling some things to see what they are interested in.
Yeah.
And, you know, perhaps some things outside of school if the school is not providing what they're interested in, but just pay close attention to what they do, what they watch,
right?
what they read, and
Or
how they spend their time.
or get them reading again. I've had so many parents say to me, you know, he was a voracious reader in middle school, read, you know, the whole trilogy or the whole whatever, and then got to middle school and everything stopped, or got to ninth grade and everything stopped because overwhelmed with work.
Yeah. Reading is always good. I mean, and it doesn't have to be novels. It doesn't have to be classics. It could actually be automotive magazines or
Read about things you're interested in.
absolutely. Reading helps test scores. We're not talking about that, but I mean, it does. Just read. And it doesn't, I mean, studies show that it doesn't matter what you read.
Correct.
It actually could also be like comic books.
Yeah.
It could be graphic novels. It could be magazines.
Websites.
It could be the New York Times. Whatever lights your fire, gets you interested in reading.
Yeah.
It's all okay. Yeah, and I'd say that's a good point, Evelyn, because extracurriculars don't have to be structured.
Right.
You don't have to be a club that you go to or lessons that you take.
Right.
It could just be something that you do with your spare time.
They can be structured. They can be a club that you join or lessons that you take, although, you know, benchmarks are important, metrics are important. So if you've taken art classes for the last 8 years, it would be nice to have produced something. Like I always say, you know, everybody always says, well, I taught myself how to play guitar, which is great. But if it's just you and the guitar, I hate to say this, but like you need some proof that you did something with it.
Yeah. I mean, well, there are different ways depending on the student, right? The guitar student, I would say to them, okay, so did that result in you playing in your talent show, you know, at the end of the year and trying that? If it wasn't that, I mean, do you get a group of friends together and have like a jam session every Saturday?
Right.
You know, or something of that nature.
Some metrics, something to hold on to.
Yeah. I also, though, I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I do think that there are ways to measure things. Like, for instance, I thought that it was very aware of you to point out, you know, how we're talking about this in a context of literally, you know, major events happening in the United States and in our world, and a turning point. And it might be really too big right now at this point for a high school student to comprehend, like, what does this all mean? Or how am I going to look back on this time when I was in high school 20 years from now and go, wow, I was in high school then when COVID happened, when, you know, so all of the things going on, that might be too vast to take in. But what I think about is, when you brought that up, you know, opportunities, if they arise and students are asking questions, or they're curious, or they want to now, because of this, volunteer in some aspect for something. I don't know what. You know, I'm not making, but if it occurs to them like, hey, I want to get more involved in this.
Right.
Sometimes that even happens, you know, it's totally fine in my mind if this happens this way. And I see this a lot with kids. I go, my friend, you know, my friend Evelyn is really into this.
Yeah.
And so I am too. Like, I want to learn about it now too, because we hang out and it's cool. And that's a way to explore things that you might get deeper into because of somebody else's interest. But I'm talking about back to accounting for hours and stuff. When you volunteer, let's say typical old volunteering, right? Heal the Bay, right? Kids volunteer for that, or a homeless shelter, or the best example to me is every Thanksgiving we volunteer at a homeless shelter.
Right.
That's awesome, but that might be 4 hours of your life.
Right.
It's not consistent over time. I don't like the fact that it doesn't seem as authentic to me if you're volunteering to count hours.
Sure, that's true. I'll give you that. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I like, though, and you're right, they can say in applications or activities section something like, every Saturday. It's consistency. Every Saturday I read to kids. Every, something like that.
Well,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's consistency, but like you said, it's authenticity. So it's not like we did this because we always do it once a year, forgetting about the people who need help the other 51 weeks. It's, I did this, even if it's not every week. I don't want to leave people with the impression that you have to do something every week, even if it's once a month. I do it because it's local to me and I see it happening and I care about it, is better than, I think most of us who advise students at this point tell them don't pay $6,000 or $7,000 to do that, volunteer in Costa Rica kind of thing, because it's kind of tone deaf to the fact that there's need. Probably whatever community you live in, there's probably need there.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think trips like that, and if you can do it, they're great experiences for kids, but right. You don't have to. You don't have to. There's plenty you can do consistently, probably at your own school even.
Right. Okay, so the next, so much to talk about and unpack here, but since we brought up the COVID situation, okay, so two things. One of the biggest fears people have is my entire extracurricular resume just got obliterated for the last couple months, and PS, summer too. That's number one. And number two is, most of the time, the advice that we would have given is don't start something new your senior year. And I think that might be sort of out the window right now, because there's a reason to have started something new right now this week.
I'd say whatever inspires you.
Right.
If you're inspired to do something new or different, that's great. Back to what you said about schedules, plans being obliterated. There's still a lot of opportunity to do things this summer. It's still very early in the summer. I know that students might be disappointed if they had a rockin' summer planned and an internship or a travel somewhere or study abroad or whatever it might be. Camp counselor. I know kids love that. They go back to their camp or CIT or a job, that they plan to work at to make some extra money, even for college, etc. So I think this is a time, though, that we can, work together, either parents with students or with people who can help guide them, like yourself, to figure out what some alternatives might be. Yep. And how you can sort of flip it around. So we talked about volunteering. Yep. And also in the age of COVID, some of those opportunities might not be available. And if that's the case, like, creativity is your friend. Yep. Right? Yep. Maybe also it's something in the neighborhood. Maybe it has to do with playing with neighborhood kids outside. Yep. Maybe I thought of even this is so old school. I'm not sure if kids really would know about this, but even writing letters to elderly people that are at home. Yep. Or emails. Yep. Tutoring elderly people on computer skills. Yep, absolutely. You could talk to them on the phone and get to them on Zoom or something like that. That would be a really creative way, if you're a techie kid, to be able to help people and tutor people. You could tutor younger kids if you have a good subject in mind, sort of a form of babysitting online. Yep. At least for a few minutes. Parents would appreciate that. Yep. I also say that there's some other things that kids could do outside this summer, because for many of us, outside isn't canceled. And perhaps if you were planning a summer inside, some things can change in that respect.
I think colleges respect, we in the counseling community, we call it grit or resilience. And I think that while all of our resilience is being tested right now. You know, that resilience is truly going to show up in the extracurriculars. So one of the people watching, if you're seeing me look down, it's because I'm looking for questions. One of the people watching us is asking, should you still report activities that you had intended to do this spring or summer, if they were sort of a continuation of something you had already done? Would you still include that in your activities on the Common application?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, if they were activities that you had done before, you would of course report those. I think the assumption would be that if they're no longer happening, let's say a sports team, right? And the season was canceled this last spring, and so you didn't go to CIX again or something like that. I think that in that case would be something that admissions officers would know. I mean, fortunately, it's it's understood widely. It's not like a local problem. You know, if you remember in the past, we've had fires, let's say in California, that have affected particular areas, or natural disasters in other areas of the country, in which we've had to make sure that colleges understand, hey, this kid comes from that neighborhood, and this whole thing was destroyed for them, as opposed to the rest of the world that went on with their business. In this case, everybody's affected. So I think the asterisk is, and they know. And so I don't think that you have to report things that didn't happen. I do hope that some things, you know, will be available to kids. I hope that their schools in some ways are planning and providing that if in the fall things are going to continue to be online, that they do have their drama class, their choir meet, their music lessons, their clubs, that they still have a space, that the school still provides a space for them to meet. I hope that that will continue. If it doesn't seem like it will be, now's a good time to maybe ask, once the school year is over and diplomas are at the door and counselors close up there, you know, but before they're gone, to say, you know, I'd like to know that this activity is going to continue next year. If we're online, that it will continue that way.
We are frequently asked if certain extracurricular activities are better than others. So is 4 years of this better than 4 years of this, or better than 3 years of this? You know, student council versus, you know, even an outside of school activity, which is better?
That's a really interesting question. I will say, I don't think there are any, in my opinion, I don't think there are activities that are better. I think that it really has to be authentic. I think that showing commitment is awesome. I think that when or if you're inclined to do so as you get older, in the upper grades, showing leadership in something that you've consistently done is great. Is being on the tennis team better than being in the band? No. I mean, I think that if you are going for a particular major, like let's say you want to major in operatic singing, I would say that a college would look for, of course, you being involved in that prior, right? It would be weird to just come up with that. So sometimes things go hand in hand with something that if you know that you want to pursue in the future, that they combine well together. And so it might be better when somebody's looking at the full picture of you to say, wow, this kid really is passionate about X thing.
So the extracurriculars help tell a story.
For sure.
So if you're pre-health, you want to have some medical-ish shadowing, volunteering, something in there?
Hey, look, if you can, but again, our circumstance right now, I mean, I used to have a lot of students volunteer at Tarzana Hospital, which was the hospital right near us, and they welcomed volunteers and they had them running and doing things. I mean, right now, I don't think hospitals are taking high school volunteers. You know, it's just not available. So I wouldn't freak out and be like, I'm never going to medical school because I didn't volunteer in high school. It's just, that's not the case. Don't freak out.
So, so if you're tuning in, the most important message you can take, no, honestly, we literally, this is our job for our clients. I used to say that my tagline was, everybody calm down.
Yes.
Everybody calm down.
Yeah.
You couldn't register for the SAT in September. Everybody calm down.
Everybody calm down. There's a way. There's a way. Everything is figure outable. 100%.
Exactly. So I was going to say pre-med, maybe some medical, I was poli-sci. I had, campaign experience or protesting experience. Believe it or not, I had protesting experience in the 80s. And frankly, if you're political in any way, there's so many opportunities, honestly, no matter where you are on earth, that frankly, you should have something political in your extracurriculars. But in general, your extracurriculars do not have to match up with your academics. It helps tell a story, but there's other ways there's other messages that your extracurriculars can tell about you.
Yes, that's correct. And I think that, again, being creative in this circumstance, do not freak out if you planned this summer to intern, at a hospital or have some of that medical experience. Do not freak out about that. I think that sometimes even colleges think that it's interesting to mix things up, right? That you're multifaceted, that you have a couple different interests. Because I think they're looking, like you said, Evelyn, for you to tell a story. And we have to remember too, right? They know these are high school kids. Okay, there's a certain element about that where they have to be somewhat realistic. And you're trying to tell a story about your interests and trying to show them some different aspects of yourself. So by just going completely in one direction, you're showing, yes, your commitment, but I think they also might think, what else do they do? Or what kind of other things interest them? Because I always like to tell my students, every college doesn't need 100 oboe players or 100 pre-med students, right? They're looking to create a community.
Yep.
So even if your friend is applying to the same college, they might look at both of you as totally different contributors to their community on campus.
Right.
And I think that's a good overall way to look at applying to colleges, is that you're trying to find a fit and they're trying to find a fit. It goes both ways.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting way to sort of illustrate, some people call us in March and April and they say, I don't understand, this kid got in and his grades and test scores were lower than my kids. How did that happen? And this is where we say grades and test scores tell a part of the story, but honestly, and frankly, test scores a very diminishing part of the story. In fact, someone's literally just commenting right now, with so many colleges going test optional, what does that say about the importance of not just which extracurriculars you're doing, which, as Karyn said, the individual activities you do are less important than the story that those extracurriculars tell about you. So Karyn, what are your thoughts on, and I'll talk to Melissa Falk about this in a couple of weeks, but what are your thoughts on, if they remove the test scores as a piece of the puzzle, what does that do to what's left?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think then the next things that they'll look at are, of course, your essays, and they'll look at your extracurriculars, and they'll look at the context of the school that you attend.
Yep.
So I think that third thing, I'll address that first, because that might be the most unknown thing, and parents might go, what do you mean by that? Everybody understands like list of extracurriculars are like a resume, things that you do, and test scores are that, and your grades are that, right? But I think the context of your school is going to be super important. And what that means is that colleges receive a usually a one sheet, which is called a profile from your high school. If you haven't seen your high schools yet, you could go on your high school's website and it's probably there. And it gives the admissions officer the context from which you come. So if you go to a school that offers 50 AP classes and 100 clubs and 15 sports teams and this and this and this and all these options, well, they're going to say, this kid should have participated in something. There's got to be something that they could have gotten involved with. If there are a lot of AP courses, they expect that you take them. If you're applying to really competitive schools, not necessarily all of the APs, but at least avail yourself of some of that opportunity. And they're going to try to see what your school offers. They look at it, usually the school puts the GPAs of the graduating class, the test scores of the means, and a graph of that. So they see that if you've got all A's, let's say you've got a 4.0, perhaps most of your high school got 4.0s, and then in which case that doesn't mean that much.
Right. So a school that has 40 valedictorians,
correct.
Being valedictorian, not as, it's not that it's not impressive, it's impressive. Obviously they worked hard to get there, but again, context.
It's different in the context. And likewise, if you go to a small school, right, and people worry about that. Well, I went to a small school and there was only 2 AP classes and only 1 language offered, and what do I do because I don't have everything that XYZ school has? And the answer is that colleges read it in the context. So as long as you're taking advantage of what is offered to you in your situation.
Yep. So we have a blog post on School Profile, what it is, how to look for it, because you absolutely need to know the context in which your child is being evaluated. I will post the link to that when we get off in the comments. So let's wrap up with a quick chat about essays. So how do you incorporate successfully a lesson you've learned or a skill or a quality that you have that you might have picked up through involvement in an extracurricular? How do you incorporate that into an essay?
Okay, so that could be a session in and of itself.
It could be.
Because it depends on if it's a shorter answer essay or if it's a longer form or what aspect you're answering. I know in California, the UCs have smaller, shorter form essays rather than larger, etc. So it depends on what you're answering. And I always tell students, you want to make sure you answer the question, right? You look at the question, you choose the one you want to answer, and you answer it. But I mean, I'd say you want to show, when you talk about extracurriculars, your depth of interest, your commitment, growth over time, right? It's not like I walked in and I was the best tennis player there and I continued to be for the rest of my high school career, right? It's like, it could be a story that shows growth. I also want to say, like, you don't have to be the president, right? You don't have to be the president or the founder of a club. You don't have to invent something. Colleges also are looking for people who are members and who are committed members of a team. Right. I would talk about that, teamwork.
Absolutely.
I would talk about potentially, if within the context of your team or club or extracurricular or activity, volunteering, if you met a mentor there that taught you something, so then it's not necessarily talking just all about yourself. And trust me, essays get boring when you start reading a bunch of essays about the volunteer experience, or there's certain things that are very common, right? Because high school students are offered certain things as people under 18 within a certain, can't drive, whatever it is, right? So they're common experiences. But I always tell my students, how do you make an essay that's about a common experience, uncommon, and yours?
Yep. Yep.
So what about the experience makes it different from your friend who did the same thing?
Same activity, right.
I used to have a lot of my students did Students Run LA.
Yeah.
Fantastic, but it was a program in LA schools that had kids train for with their teachers and run the LA Marathon as the end goal. And a lot of them would write essays about their experience running the marathon. And I would say to them, everybody had this experience.
Right.
There are thousands of kids that had the same experience, but you need to talk about how every Tuesday and Thursday you ran with your English teacher, who was the teacher mentor who also ran the marathon with you, and the relationship outside of the classroom that you built with that teacher, and how that teacher knows you. Yep. And then, not to explode everybody's brain, but to be complimented by a letter of recommendation from a teacher who's your advisor that says, I saw Evelyn go from somebody, and you can relate to this, Evelyn, because you
never ran a marathon.
Because you ran, I saw Evelyn, who at first couldn't run 3 miles, the 5K, but then over time built this up and her commitment to this. So reinforce it with that person. So I'd say if you have a mentor in that place that you learned from, if you learned a lesson out of that maybe not everybody else got, those kinds of things are ways to differentiate your experience that may be common from others.
That's fabulous advice, and so true. So many kids have really the same things available to them. So you really have two choices. You have to take what you have and make it yours, or you have to go outside your school and do something, I always say, that other teenagers can't or won't do. And that's hard. It's just the choices are very limited.
I think back to your calm down, stay calm. It's just back to that, be authentic.
Yeah.
Because colleges, I think readers can sort of smell the list building, and I did this doesn't mean this, and the posturing, and the more versus
it oozes.
It appears not authentic, and also just know, not everybody is the president of the club.
Absolutely.
That's totally okay. Being a member, you don't have to start something that doesn't need to be started. You can just join something and be a really active member.
But it's nice to take responsibility for something, because again, what's the end goal? Colleges are looking to see who you will be on their campus, and the only evidence you have to show them is what you've done on your campus until now.
Sure. That reminds me too, back to that person's question that you brought up, if test scores aren't as important, and some schools are test optional if you decide not to take the tests, what else, are they looking at? And I did just mention letters of recommendation. And I also just think that along with letters of recommendation, that they're looking for sort of your creativity, and you're developing skills, right? They don't expect you to be fully developed, right? That you're building skills over time, and that leadership over time. It's just that question is, if you're not taking the tests, or they're not looking at the tests, how do they know? And I don't know, what do you think, Evelyn? Because you were doing this before for Hopkins, and I know other schools have it available, but what is your opinion on this about interviews? Will that become a more important, will more schools be offering interviews?
I have arrived at the conclusion, and I think it's fairly well supported, that interviews are looked at as something that privileged kids know how to request, and kids who don't have someone like me helping them find that request end up not being interviewed. And so it's yet another advantage for the already advantaged. I would say, so I can tell you Hopkins has stopped interviewing completely. I will tell you the exceptions to this are Georgetown interviews almost every applicant, Princeton interviews almost every applicant, like 90%, and Stanford interviews a good number. Obviously, these are highly, highly selective schools among a sea of, as anyone who's ever seen me talk before knows, 2,200 colleges, although we will probably see that number contract, but that's also another story. So I think that for colleges that do offer interviews, they are important, again, because they're looking for the human being that you are and that you will be on their campus, right? Princeton one time said at a breakfast, I don't even know if you were at it, but I was at it, and the woman from Princeton said, we're looking to see what kind of roommate, what kind of classmate, what kind of teammate you're going to be. So, the person who shows up with a resume, list, and then here's my essay where I relist everything I've done, that doesn't tell them what kind of teammate you're going to be. You haven't answered their question, the question behind the question.
Right. Yeah, no, I was just trying to think a little bit creatively, just project, what colleges might do to answer that parent's question, to really get a full picture of the student. I do think also that, getting an early start on those essays is always important, multiple drafts, and having many people read them. But not too many people.
Not too many, right.
Not too many people, but a few trusted people to tell you their impression, because sometimes when talking about extracurriculars, I've found that students, when they write their essays about their extracurricular, that they think in their mind it's conveying one thing. But as an adult reader, you see something totally different that they didn't even intend.
Right.
And so to have somebody outside of the family, a parent is a good first, but sometimes they don't even want their parents to read it.
Right.
They're a little bit shy about it because sometimes they're personal and it just depends. So they want another adult to read it. It could be a teacher at school that they trust. It could be you, Evelyn. It could be another mentor that they have or a family friend, whatever. But it is important that their voice be heard and read by an adult to give them the honest impression of if they sound like a little snot or if they're not. I'm serious.
No,
I've had kids that are not.
It happens.
I've had kids that are not little snots at all, and I'm like, oh, if I read this, I would think, or the other end of the spectrum, right? Like really understating.
Right.
Really understating and being overly modest about something.
Colleges tell us all the time, the activities list is where students undersell themselves. So you really have to walk this very fine line between, like you said, being snotty and being too modest.
And come on.
And you have 150 characters to do it.
Yes, but there is some room, again, calm down. There's some room for, space there because they are teenagers and we don't want other people writing their essays for them. Right. And, there's allowance there. There's some space, but awareness is important. I also, something just occurred to me. I think I was going to say it before, but it sort of lapsed and then it came back. Regarding, the world, regarding COVID, regarding their reaction to protesters or political issues. Yeah. I do think that showing a sense of awareness, perhaps, I don't know what essay questions will be, but perhaps essay questions might allow them to express or to note their processing of events. Yep. And if they've discussed them with friends or teachers or their school. I do think that in the position that I'm in currently at LanguageBird, because I'm answering the phone of parents every day, and one of the things that we talk about is the idea of understanding, and I've really felt this, especially with regard to COVID, is that, you know, the whole world is experiencing this together.
Right.
So my teachers that are in Spain or in Argentina or wherever they are in the world, Italy, when I connect with them, they're sheltering at home. They are, you know, and there was a time in March and April where my students who were connecting to them really felt this world connection. And I think they're understanding that, wow, I'm taking Spanish from Natalia in Argentina. And right now it's winter there and she's wearing a sweater. And, you know, it sounds like kind of basic, but it's world awareness. And when they speak to her and they say, oh, you're at stay-at-home orders too, or you're quarantined, and what's it like there? And what's your medicine like there? And it's just an entire awareness that I think that is important. I don't, again, want to get too big for high school students, but that they have a global awareness. Perhaps some of them are growing and maturing into some sort of political stance, right? This is an election year. Maybe some of them are into that. And remember, again, I'm not saying that they have to be. They don't have to be. But if this is something important to them, it's a good opportunity to explore it. Culture, other countries. In my case, kids are coming for other languages to expand their worldview. So
I think even a local community engagement is kind of the word that I hear. And I agree with you. I think, and again, I think the value of that is that, again, colleges can see how you will contribute to their campus community if you show how you've engaged either locally or globally. I actually think we're going to see additional essay questions this year, not just about COVID, but I just feel like colleges really, like you're saying, they want to see how students connect with each other in all the places where they are. And again, this is where, as adults, as parents, we have to take a step back, because the way we engage with the world is different. Even though you've raised them to be just like you, they're still engaged with the world and think about the world in a different way than you do. And I think now is the time, or at least when they're applying to college, now is the time to give them the space to express that way in which they are aware and engaged and connected. And extracurricular activities are one way for them to do that. But as you're saying, it's so interesting, because now that I think about it, now that my mind is processing it, we have COVID, which is medical, but it's a lot of other things. And we have the protests, which are political and anthropological, but there are a lot of other things. And so the question is, like, I have a student who's a computer science student, and he's doing some coding that is related to the COVID situation. So I guess the question that I would have is, so 17, 18-year-old, what are you interested in? And is it connected in some way to any of the things that, like you said, all of us across the country, across the world have experienced over the last few months? And if you think that your 17-year-old can write that essay in 4 days in October, you're wrong. And that's why, as Karyn said, the longer you get, the earlier you get started on those essays, the better, because there's a lot of processing to do. These are not, read Anna Karenina and analyze, chapter 7. These are very reflective.
Although that would be difficult as well.
That would be not impossible, but
yeah. Yeah, I just, and I think that if it's parents that are mostly listening to this, maybe some students are listening with them, that if it's possible, and if you feel equipped to do so and have that relationship with your student, that now might be a good time, since you're at home anyway with each other, to have some conversations, if you don't already, about some of these topics. Because you might get to know your kid a little bit better than you did if you ask and leave space for them to have opinions and to ask questions um, and have their own thoughts about it or questions. So that might be valuable in itself, because I hate recommending to do anything just as an exercise per completing a college application. But you could perhaps, you know, start having some conversations and hear something and go, God, you know, that's so insightful, Evelyn. I knew you would be insightful because you're my child and brilliant, but it could be, it could be a fabulous thing to talk about, the way that you relate your school community and how your school transitioned from, you know, being in school to online and how that affected friendships, or how you and your friends talk to, or something. I don't know, I'm just making up, but you know, you could say, wow, I think that would make a really great essay. Actually, you have some really good opinions about that and it's really interesting. So even just starting by talking to them might be a good way to get those things out.
So we end where we started, which is what are colleges looking for? They're looking for kids to be interesting and interested.
Yeah.
I thank you, Karyn, for joining me. This was fun, and
It was fun.
I thank everyone for sticking with us. This was a long one, and this one will be posted on our website, where the previous 5 already are. If you missed any of the previous 5 conversations, they're there on our website. I'll post the link to that as well. And I hope you'll be back next week, Thursday at 5:30. Make it a habit. I am. Y'all give me a reason to dry my hair once a week.
That's so funny.
So thank you again, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks so much.